The text was still on my screen when I walked through the restaurant door. I had found it by accident. Her phone lit up on the kitchen counter while she was upstairs getting ready. I wasn't trying to read it, but the preview was right there, bright against the screen. Private table is ready. Tonight changes everything, Red Heart. She had told me she was having dinner with friends from her design circle. A girls' night. She had said it casually while applying lipstick in the bathroom mirror. And I had said okay, and she had kissed my cheek on the way out wearing a red dress I had never seen before. I stood in the restaurant doorway and found her immediately. She was at the corner table, the same restaurant where we had held our wedding reception 9 years ago, sitting across from a man I didn't recognize. He reached across the white tablecloth and kissed her hand. She leaned slightly forward and said, clear enough to hear, I can finally breathe again. Then she looked up and saw me. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed, the sharp, tight look of someone whose plan has been interrupted. And then she said loudly, so the whole room could hear, why are you stalking me? Every head in the restaurant turned. The man across from her stood up slowly, looking confused. He glanced between us, reading the room, trying to place himself in a situation that had no comfortable position. Vivian laughed, a soft social laugh that sounded practiced. She touched his arm and said, this is my ex. He's still emotionally attached. Ex. I stood there holding 9 years of marriage in my chest while she reduced it to a punchline in front of strangers. Then she leaned slightly toward him and dropped her voice. But not enough. The room was quiet enough that I heard it perfectly. He was never on my level. Level. Something shifted inside me in that moment. Not the hot, sharp feeling I expected. Something colder and much more deliberate, like a door closing very quietly on a room that was about to be cleared out. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself or appeal to her or make a scene. I just said calmly and evenly, enjoy your dinner. And I turned around and walked out, because she thought I was blindsided by what I had just seen. She had no idea I wasn't. My name is Daniel. I manage commercial properties for a regional development group, a job that most people find unremarkable, which suits me perfectly. Predictable schedules, detailed contracts, long-term planning. I am good at the kind of work that requires patience and precision rather than performance. I paid off Vivian's debt from before our marriage, student loans and a maxed credit card she never mentioned until we were engaged. I did it without drama because I thought that was what partners did. I funded her boutique dream when she found it, put in the hours on weekends when she needed support, and passed on a management promotion that would have required travel and upset the stability she said she needed at home. She called me her rock for years. Solid, dependable. Then, about 2 years ago, she started calling me something different. Not to my face, not directly, but in the way she framed me to friends. The word she used, I eventually learned, was small. What I knew, and what she had never once considered, was that rocks don't crumble under pressure. They shift. And when they do, the structures built on top of them have to find a new place to stand. 3 years before Valentine's night, Vivian came to me with a business plan printed on 12 pages. A clothing boutique, curated pieces, local designers, an online arm that would grow over time. She had done research, mapped suppliers, sketched a layout for a retail space she had already identified. It was the most organized I had ever seen her, and I supported it completely. We liquidated $42,000 from our joint savings to fund the launch. I didn't hesitate. I wanted her to succeed. The first year was rough, as most first years are. Suppliers were inconsistent. Foot traffic was slower than projected. When a key designer pulled out 6 months in, Vivian took it hard. I worked weekend overtime to cover our household costs while the boutique found its footing. I reassured her when she doubted herself. I took the night calls when she panicked about inventory. Afterward, I heard through a mutual friend that she had told people I never really understood her ambition. I let it go at the time, but I understood something she hadn't fully considered. I understood numbers. And for several months before Valentine's night, the numbers in our joint accounts had been moving in ways that didn't match anything she had told me. I had simply been watching and waiting. The signs had been building for 6 months before Valentine's Day, and I had cataloged every one of them. Her phone began writing face down on every surface. A new screen password appeared without explanation. There were cash withdrawals from our joint account, small amounts, irregular intervals, no corresponding receipts. Networking dinners began appearing twice a week on a calendar she used to share openly with me, and had since made private. And one name kept appearing in the transaction notes from her business debit card. Ryan. A supplier reference here, a transfer memo there. When I mentioned it once, carefully without accusation, she tilted her head and gave me the look I had come to know well. You're insecure, she said. That's a business contact. You wouldn't understand that world. And she walked out of the kitchen. That was the night I stopped asking questions. Not because I had given up and not because I believed her, but because I understood something very clearly in that moment. Questions give away what you know, and I was not ready to show her what I knew. I started building answers instead, quietly, in a folder on my work laptop that she had no access to. 2 months before Valentine's Day, I opened a personal savings account at a bank we had never used together. I rerouted a portion of my monthly paycheck into it, a percentage that wouldn't trigger any unusual activity in our joint finances. I moved my inheritance funds, which had been sitting accessible in a linked account, into a protected trust structure with attorney Brenda Park, a financial attorney who had been referred by a colleague I trusted. The process took 3 separate meetings and several weeks, but it was thorough and entirely legal. Then I went through our full joint banking history for the previous 18 months and downloaded every statement. I organized them by date and flagged every transaction I couldn't account for. I cross-referenced the charges with receipts I had access to, calendar entries, and the business records I could verify. What started as a pattern of small, unexplained withdrawals grew into something much more significant the further back I looked. I sat at my desk one evening with a complete picture laid out in front of me, and I understood that what I was looking at was not simply an affair. This was a calculated financial arrangement, and I had documentation going back further than she would ever have expected. The LLC registration was the piece that clarified everything. I found it while reviewing a linked business search I had set up months earlier using Vivian's name. A limited liability company had been registered 4 months before Valentine's Day. A boutique retail and distribution company with a clean, professional name. Listed as co-directors, Vivian and Ryan Caldwell. The initial seed capital recorded in the filing was $31,000. I cross-referenced that figure against our joint savings account statements. Over a period of 7 months, transfers totaling $31,000 had moved out of our account in increments, coded as boutique operational expenses, design consultations, and supplier deposits. None of it corresponded to any vendor I could verify. They were not just in a relationship. They had built a business plan together, funded by my inheritance and our joint savings, while she was still married to me, still living in my house, still eating dinner across from me 3 or 4 nights a week, and telling me about her industry contacts. I sat with that information for a full evening. I didn't make any calls. I didn't send any messages. The following morning, I contacted attorney Brenda Park and made an appointment. I had everything she was going to need. Attorney Park was efficient, composed, and completely without sentiment, which was exactly what I needed. I laid the documentation out on her desk in the order I had organized it. The transaction history showing the $31,000 moved from our joint account, the LLC registration, the cash withdrawal pattern, the text message screenshot, and the phone records I had documented through our family plan account. She went through everything methodically. When she finished, she looked at me across the desk and asked, "Do you want to react or do you want to win?" I told her I wanted to win. She pulled out the post-nuptial agreement Vivian and I had signed 6 years into our marriage. At Vivian's request, actually, she had wanted clarity about the boutique's assets being protected from any future business liability. Attorney Park turned to the clauses and read them aloud. Clause 8. Infidelity if documented voids any alimony claim. Clause 11. Evidence of financial misconduct affects the division of marital assets. She set the document down and said simply, "Let her keep underestimating you." I told her I intended to, and so I did, for another 6 weeks, right up until Valentine's Day. While Vivian continued planning a future she had no idea was already collapsing. After the restaurant, Vivian began her campaign. She called mutual friends the following day. I heard the general shape of it through 2 people who respected me enough to let me know what was being said. The story she was telling was carefully constructed, We had been emotionally separated for over a year. I had been controlling. She had outgrown the relationship, but stayed out of loyalty until it became impossible. She was finally stepping into her real life. She used a phrase intimidated by my growth at least twice, according to the sources who related to me. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't call anyone to dispute her version. I didn't post anything online or send any pointed messages to mutual connections. But she kept texting me. Not long messages, sharp ones. Comments about the house. Questions about finances framed as demands. Observations about my character designed to provoke a reaction she could use. I saved every one, with timestamps, with full message, threads for context. Each one she sent was another entry in a document that was growing longer and more useful by the day. She believed she was winning the narrative. She was actually building my case. 2 weeks after Valentine's Day, Vivian and Ryan signed a retail lease. I learned about it through the LLC registration activity I was monitoring, and Attorney Park confirmed the details through the discovery process we had already begun. The lease carried an $18,000 deposit and a 6-month minimum commitment on a retail space in a mid-range commercial district. She had done the math on our impending divorce and made a decision based on assumptions that she would receive alimony, that she would receive half of our shared assets, including the house, and that she would have the liquidity to sustain the new business while the legal process resolved. The math was wrong. The morning after I confirmed the lease details, I contacted our bank and placed a freeze on all joint account withdrawal capabilities, pending formal separation documentation. It was a step Attorney Park had outlined in our first meeting, timed precisely for this point in the process. Vivian didn't discover it immediately. She was busy planning a launch event for the new boutique with Ryan, updating her social media with photos of the retail space, and telling anyone who would listen about her fresh start and expanded vision. Underneath all of it, the ground was already gone. She called me at 11:43 on a Thursday morning, and her voice had an edge I hadn't heard in exactly that form before, the specific pitch of someone who has been embarrassed in public and is looking for somewhere to direct it. Her card had declined at a supplier meeting, not a small meeting either. Ryan was there. 2 investors they had been courting for weeks were there. The supplier had run the card 3 times at Vivian's request before the 4th attempt produced the same result in front of everyone. "You embarrassed me," she said. "You deliberately did this to humiliate me." I let her finish. Then I said, quietly and without any particular emphasis, "You introduced me as your ex." I ended the call. She didn't call back immediately, which told me she was recalibrating, running through what my response meant, what I might actually know, how far behind she might be. She had spent weeks believing she was managing me. That one sentence had just introduced significant doubt. It was the first small crack in her confidence. She still believed she could recover. She had no idea that while she was standing at that supplier table managing the awkwardness of a decline card, Attorney Park had already filed the petition. The divorce papers were served on a Saturday morning. Vivian was at brunch at a restaurant she and her friends had been going to for years. An open terrace place on a popular street where being seen was half the reason for going. She was sitting with Ryan and 2 of her closest friends when the process server arrived. The envelope was placed in front of her at the table. She looked at it for a moment before opening it, and I imagine she understood what it was before she touched it. The words on the first page were clear. Petition for divorce grounds. Adultery and financial misconduct. Ryan read the top line over her shoulder. Adultery, he said. She had told him apparently that we had been formally separated, that our marriage had been over emotionally for more than a year, that we were navigating a straightforward dissolution, that she was completely free. He had believed her because she had been very convincing. The word adultery in a legal filing with a formal ground citation was not something she could reframe in the moment. I heard afterward, through Attorney Park's communications with his own legal representative, that he left the brunch table without finishing his coffee. The cracks were beginning to widen. Ryan came to my office on a Tuesday afternoon unannounced. My assistant said someone was at the front desk asking to speak with me. And when I came out, I recognized him from the restaurant, taller than he had looked seated, wearing the careful expression of someone who has recently learned he was significantly misled. I brought him into the small meeting room and closed the door. I didn't speak first. I placed 3 documents on the table in front of him. The marriage certificate current, not historical. The mortgage statement from the previous month, showing the property in both our names with active payments. The health insurance policy, renewed 60 days before Valentine's Day, listing Vivian as spouse. He stared at the documents for a long time. She said you were abusive, he finally said. She said the marriage had been over for more than a year. She said you refused to leave. I opened my phone and showed him our anniversary dinner photos from 6 months before Valentine's Day. A table for 2, both of us smiling. A card she had written in her handwriting on the back of the receipt I had kept. He didn't raise his voice. He looked up from the photos and said very quietly, "She lied to me." Ryan stopped answering Vivian's calls the week after he came to my office. I know this because it became relevant in the legal process. His attorney contacted Attorney Park to clarify his position relative to the LLC and the disputed funds, and the communication trail established the timeline of when he withdrew from the personal relationship. He did not withdraw from the lease, however, not immediately. His priorities shifted to protecting his own financial position, which meant he pulled his personal investment from the LLC account rather than leaving it exposed to the misconduct documentation that was now part of the court discovery process. Without that capital, the LLC had no operating funds. Without operating funds, the boutique couldn't pay inventory invoices. Without inventory payments, the suppliers who had committed to the launch pulled their stock. The landlord sent a formal notice about penalties for breach of operational terms within the lease agreement. The boutique had committed to being open within 60 days, and that timeline had collapsed. Vivian was holding a 6-month lease on an empty retail space with no suppliers, no operating capital, and a co-director who had stopped responding to her messages. This was what Attorney Park had simply called Level 2. Court discovery began 6 weeks after the petition was filed. The process required full financial disclosure from both sides, and Attorney Park had been preparing our documentation package since before Valentine's Day, when the court appointed forensic accountants to review the joint financial history, a step that became necessary given the scale of the misconduct claims. The picture that emerged from the records was comprehensive and damaging. The total figure of funds misallocated from our joint accounts over the preceding 18 months was confirmed at $47,000. It was not a rounding error. It was not ambiguous. Every transfer had a date, a destination account, and a corresponding LLC record showing where the money had been applied. The forensic team's report was methodical and precise. They had done exactly what I had done months earlier, but with legal authority and professional documentation standards. Her attorney's confidence, which had been high in the early stages of proceedings, visibly shifted after the forensic report was submitted. The framing of the case changed. What had begun as a fairly standard dissolution with contested terms was now a case with a financial misconduct component attached to it. And the judge had read every page. The post-nuptial clauses, which had once been Vivian's idea, were now the most relevant documents in the case. The social collapse happened in stages. The first stage was quiet. The slow cooling of responses, missed group chat messages, polite but brief replies that replaced longer conversations she had been used to. Friends who had heard her version of events began hearing fragments of the documented version and couldn't reconcile the two. The second stage was more direct. The forensic audit findings became known through connected circles in which we both moved. People who knew attorneys or accountants or mutual contacts who had seen the filing. The controlling husband narrative lost its footing when financial records entered the conversation. Her sister, Petra, called me. Vivian and Petra had always been close. When Petra reached out, she was brief and measured. She said she had seen enough of the documentation to understand the situation clearly. She said she was sorry it had come to this. She said she hoped I was doing all right. She didn't ask me to intervene on Vivian's behalf. She didn't defend her either. That call told me more about how completely the narrative had reversed than any other single signal. When the people who love someone most can no longer argue for them, the story has already been written. The hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday in late spring. Vivian arrived with her attorney, composed in the deliberate way of someone who has spent time practicing composure. She was dressed professionally, posture straight, expression neutral. I had seen that version of her before, the public presentation she assembled for situations she needed to manage. Her attorney had filed for significant alimony based on income disparity and years of contribution to the marriage. She had also filed for an equal division of all marital assets, including the house and the remaining joint savings. My attorney presented first. She walked the court through the documented affair timeline, dates, digital records, the LLC registration that predated Valentine's Day by 4 months. She presented the forensic accountant's report confirming the $47,000 in misallocated funds. She submitted the post-nuptial agreement and highlighted clauses 8 and 11 directly. Then she read both clauses aloud, slowly, into the court record. Vivian's attorney requested a brief recess. I sat at the table and looked at the documents in front of me. The same records I had been building since those evenings alone at my desk with bank statements and a determination to be precise rather than emotional. That recess request told me exactly where we were. The judge delivered the ruling 11 days after the hearing. No alimony. The post-nuptial clause 8, in combination with the documented evidence of adultery, was clear and legally applicable. There was no ambiguity in the record and no basis for exception. Asset division was adjusted due to financial misconduct. Rather than an equal split, Vivian's share of joint assets was reduced proportionally to account for the $47,000 in misallocated funds, which were ordered to be repaid from her portion of the settlement. The house was allocated to me, with a 60-day window for her to vacate. The judge made one comment before closing the ruling, a statement that Attorney Park told me later was unusually direct for a family court proceeding. Marriage, the judge said, is not a financial strategy. I wrote it down. Not to use, just to keep. Vivian left the courthouse with her attorney without looking in my direction. I don't know what conversation they had on the steps outside. I sat for a few minutes in the cleared courtroom and let the quiet settle. Then I called Attorney Park to discuss the practical next steps. The legal chapter had closed cleanly, but I was aware, without any particular satisfaction, that the consequences extending beyond the courtroom were still unfolding. When Vivian moved her belongings out of the house, I stayed out of the way. I arranged to be at the office that day, and when I came home, the rooms were quieter than they had been in years. Not the silence of absence. Something different. Something closer to space. Room to breathe without calculating someone else's mood. She had used one of the spare bedrooms for boutique overflow, sample boxes, hanging racks, fabric rolls that never made it into any display. The room had been collecting that clutter for 2 years. I spent a weekend clearing it out. I repainted the walls, brought in a proper desk and second monitor, and set up a workspace I had been meaning to create for 3 years but had always found a reason to delay. Property consulting had been an idea I had been sitting on since before we married. A side practice leveraging my industry contacts and the expertise built over 11 years in commercial property management. Without managing a complicated household, without the financial drain of supporting decisions I had no part in making, and without the background noise of a marriage held together by performance rather than partnership, I had time, space, and capital, and I knew exactly what to do with all three. Within 6 months of the ruling, the consulting practice had 3 signed commercial contracts. They came through the professional network I had been building steadily throughout my career. Contacts I had maintained quietly, people who knew my work and had been waiting for the right moment to engage me directly rather than through my employer. Revenue in the first half year exceeded what I had projected for the full first year. I brought on a junior associate to handle administrative work and client outreach. I restructured my schedule to give the practice real time alongside my existing employment, with a 12-month plan to transition fully if the numbers continued to support it. The momentum was not dramatic. It didn't arrive in a single moment or breakthrough. It built the way I had always built things, methodically with attention to detail and a long view of where each decision was taking me. I was described by one client in a referral email he sent to 2 colleagues as someone who doesn't waste your time. I kept that email. I was 41 years old. I was doing the best professional work of my life, and I was doing it from a workspace that used to hold other people's abandoned inventory. The universe, it seemed, was not yet finished arranging things. The boutique never opened. The lease defaulted after the third missed payment to the landlord. The penalty clauses in the commercial agreement added to Vivian's financial liability, which compounded the debt from the divorce settlement repayment. Her credit rating dropped sharply in the 6 months following the ruling. The LLC she had registered with Ryan was formally dissolved through the state registry. I saw the filing during a routine search I did out of professional habit, not active interest. Ryan had, in the end, taken steps to legally distance himself from the LLC and its liabilities. Steps his own attorney had apparently advised quickly after the divorce proceedings clarified his exposure. He blocked Vivian across every platform she had been using to reach him. From what reached me indirectly, through a mutual contact who knew both of them, he had moved to a different city within the year. Vivian was renting a one-bedroom apartment on the eastern side of the city. No boutique, no partnership, no house. I didn't look for these updates. They arrived through the ordinary movement of information in shared networks, mentioned in passing, unremarkable to the people relaying them. I noted them and moved forward. I saw her in a grocery store on a Saturday morning in September. She was in the produce section holding a small basket, wearing ordinary clothes. None of the carefully assembled presentation I had always associated with her in public. She looked like someone who had been tired for a long time and had stopped disguising it. I almost redirected to another aisle. Then I thought, that would be the behavior of someone who is still managing her. I wasn't. I pushed my cart forward and nodded when she looked up and saw me. There was a long pause before she spoke. "Do you ever miss us?" she asked. The question was softer than I expected, not calculated. Or if it was, the calculation had been worn thin by circumstance. I thought about it honestly for a moment, not about her specifically, about the version of events I had once believed I was living inside, the stable partnership, the mutual investment, the future I had organized my life around. "I miss who I thought you were," I said. I kept walking. She didn't follow, and she didn't call after me. That was the last conversation with any weight in it we would ever have. Almost. The final message came on a Tuesday evening, 8 months after the ruling. My phone showed her name. The contact I'd kept in my list under her full name rather than deleting it, because complete erasure sometimes creates its own form of weight. The message was short. "I made a mistake. We could fix this." I read it twice. There was no apology in it. Nothing that acknowledged specific harm or took responsibility for specific choices. It was a proposal disguised as confession, an offer dressed up in the language of regret. The old version of me, the one who had worked weekends and passed up promotions and drained savings accounts in the belief that partnership meant absorbing whatever the other person needed, might have felt something pulling him at those words. I felt nothing of the kind. What I felt instead was recognition of how far I had come from the man who had stood in a restaurant doorway on Valentine's night, feeling the ground disappear beneath him. I set the phone face down on my desk. Silence, when someone expects desperation, is its own complete answer. That was the moment I understood something I would carry forward from everything. She was never my downfall. She was my catalyst. A year after Valentine's Day, I reserved the private table at the same restaurant. Not for revenge, not to reconstruct the scene, or perform some symbolic act of reclamation. I sat with that motivation for a while before I made the reservation, and I was honest with myself about it. I wanted to close something in a way that felt complete rather than simply abandoned. The restaurant looked exactly as it had. Same corner table, same lighting, same violinist in the far corner who played the same 2 pieces on rotation and had probably been there longer than any of the relationships that had ended in that room. Across from me sat a woman named Alana, who I had met through a professional event 4 months earlier. She was calm and direct and laughed easily and asked questions she genuinely wanted answered. She had not replaced anything. She was simply herself, present, on an evening that happened to fall on Valentine's Day. When she smiled at me over the menu, there was nothing chaotic underneath it. No calculation to read, no temperature to check, no performance to interpret. It felt straightforward. That was, I realized, the thing I had forgotten was even possible. A relationship that didn't require management. A year earlier, she had said it in a restaurant full of people who heard every word. He was never on my level. She was right, as it turned out, just not in the direction she meant. I was too small for the life she had been building without my knowledge. The life that required a loyal, stable partner in the background, while she arranged a different future using his money and his trust, and his willingness to believe the best of the person he had chosen. That life had no room for someone who kept records. So I grew. I expanded the consulting practice, which had 6 active contracts and projected full independence from my employer by the following spring. I rebuilt my savings on a foundation that was clean in mind. I raised my own standards for what I was willing to accept. And here is what the experience taught me, reduced to its clearest form. Preparation beats emotion. Every time. Documentation beats drama. Always. Silence beats any argument at the right moment. And the best answer to someone who calls you small is not to argue with them. It's to build something so solid and real that the accusation becomes its own quiet joke. The private table was ready. This time I had reserved it.